Hi, this is Amy Chen Mills with Moment of Truth with Amy Chen Mills, and I'm with you to introduce a special bonus episode of Moment of Truth around the student encampments for Palestine and against the quote-unquote genocide in Gaza. Right around May 1st, the UCSC encampment, University of California at Santa Cruz, started. And before that, Columbia, UCLA, and many other universities had started encampments. In fact, Stanford University was one of the very first to start an encampment. And since no confrontations happened there, it was not covered by the news, which is one of the reasons why protesters actually escalate, because their regular peaceful protests are often not covered by the news media. So when UCSC started their encampment on May 1st, on May Day, at the end of a May Day march at the Quarry Plaza at UCSC, I decided to go up and see what was going on. I went up there and I interviewed a media liaison who was featured in this podcast. You will hear from her. Her name is Sasha. And then we also sent Vara, who is on our Moment of Truth team, to Stanford to interview a mostly Palestinian group at the Stanford encampment. So you will hear from all kinds of people who are speaking from these encampments. And also I am going to address some personal experiences I've had in my community trying to report accurately on what's happening here, both in and during the ceasefire resolution process for our city and for our county, and then also what was happening up at the encampment, which also I got some blowback from community members when I tried to report accurately. So I'm going to try to let the students speak for themselves for the most part, and then I'm going to jump in and talk about some of the biggest projections and misunderstandings that I see. This is part of a series that includes Palestinian voices on Israel-Gaza-Palestine, as well as Jewish dialogues on Israel-Gaza-Palestine, in the hopes that people can start to listen to one another, which is very difficult in a time of great devastation, mass killings, and war. So our first interview is with Sasha at the UCSC encampment, actually on May 1st, the day the encampment started. So I'm here at UCSC up at the student plaza, the Quarry Plaza, where they just started a pro-Palestinian anti-genocide encampment. And I'm here with
Sasha Stetler.
Sasha Stetler is actually a Jewish student. I would say right now there's about maybe, 20 tents?
Yeah, I'd say we have around 20 tents set up right now.
Okay. So about 20 tents, and some of them are in, it's actually pretty baking hot in some areas, and then some of the tents are in the shade. Sasha, what year are you here?
I'm a third-year legal studies major.
And why did you get inspired to do this, or you and other organizers? It's also May Day, so I don't know if that's part of your answer, but why on this day, and why do this encampment here?
We definitely wanted to start on May Day because, first off, we knew that there would be a large amount of people gathering for the May Day rally, and therefore it would cause a little bit more attention for our encampment once they reached the quarry, which it did. And we are in solidarity with the workers' union and workers and oppressed people all across the world. And we also, it took us a little bit more time to get started than some of the other universities because we have been planning very intensely for weeks. Our core organizers have been working so incredibly hard to make sure that we are as prepared as possible, and they've been doing a really, really amazing job. So that's why it took us a little bit longer than some other universities to get started. But we have a lot of really amazing people working here that have been working so tirelessly for these efforts.
That's interesting, because the way you might see this on social media or on the news is it just popped up and all of a sudden UC's joining the others, but actually you've been organizing for some time. I mean, why are you being so careful about the organizing?
We have to be so careful about the organizing because we know that UC regents and administration are not in support of our actions. We have seen what has happened at the other campuses, the deployment of police and the suppression of pro-Palestinian voices. So when organizing, we had to be very discreet. So we we're hoping to not have a police presence here when we launch the encampment, which luckily we do not right now. We are anticipating at some point this week for a police presence to be here, but we have so many people in higher up positions that are working against us and working to suppress our voices. So that is why we had to be so discreet and work so hard to prepare for every possible situation.
And you are Jewish. And how is your family feeling about this?
I come from a very pro-Palestinian family. I have been learning about the history of Palestine since I was in high school. It's very important to me because I think being a Jew in a time of genocide, we know more than anyone what genocide looks like, and we should be able to recognize this as what it is, as genocide, as ethnic cleansing, and we should say, not in our name. This genocide cannot be in our name. Israel is weaponizing our religion as an excuse to commit genocide and painting pro-Palestinians to be anti-Semitic when the most anti-Semitic institution is Israel. Weaponizing our sacred religion and the very real issue of anti-Semitism as an excuse to commit genocide disrespects every real victim of anti-Semitism everywhere. Jews should be for freedom, for liberation, and there are so many Jews at the forefront of this movement. And it's been really disappointing to see how the mainstream media has been portraying us, because we are really just rooted here in community, in love, in solidarity. We are here for one reason, and that is to stand with and raise solidarity for the people of Gaza. And there are so many Jewish people at the forefront of this movement, and it's very disappointing to not see that portrayed on the media, to only see the few rare instances of anti-Semitism, and then also for the media to not mention the increased anti-Muslim, anti-Palestinian, anti-Arab hate crimes that have been happening, and only focusing on any anti-Semitism that is going on. So I'm here because this genocide cannot be in my name. I am a Jewish person, and I do not support Israel. I do not support the settler colonial apartheid state of Israel, and my religion cannot be used as a proxy to commit genocide.
In terms of supporting Israel or not supporting Israel, you're very clear you don't support Israel. What do you see as an alternative to what is there now? There's basically an Israeli state. There are these occupied territories. There's this war. What would you propose to do in the region of this many millions of people?
Well, like one of our popular slogans, from the river to the sea, we think that this land should be given back to Palestinian people. Israel violently, illegally occupied that land after the 1940s. The past 75 years, they have been suppressing and oppressing and murdering, torturing Palestinian lives, and that was their land that they peacefully lived on just 76 years ago. So I think that the Israeli state, in the way that it currently operates, cannot operate without genocide. And occupiers, if you care about your land, you're not destroying it. You're not killing the people there. You're not killing the environment there. And that is what Israel is doing, because they don't actually care about the land that they are on. Palestinians have been standing with their land. They have been dying for their land, because that is their land. And I think that the land should be given back to Palestine, because no state should have to ethnically cleanse to exist. If your state's existence depends on the genocide of someone else, then it is not a valid state.
And what about all the Israeli people and Jewish people who live there now? Are you talking about a one-state solution? Are you saying everyone has to leave?
I don't think that Jewish people, Israeli people, would need to be evacuated from the land, but I think it should be a Palestinian state. When it was a Palestinian state, there were Jewish people that lived there peacefully. There were multiple religions that lived there harmoniously. It was just the state of Palestine where Palestinian people could also live in their land peacefully. And I think in order for Palestinians to be able to survive and thrive on their land, it has to become a Palestinian state. And that doesn't mean to kill or evacuate all the Jewish people that live there. That just means that they would live under a Palestinian state, which is what it was just a few decades ago. Not a few decades ago, 7 decades ago. But yeah, we're calling for this land to be given back for Palestinian people is not a call for violence against Israelis, is not a call for violence against Jewish people. It is just a call to get Palestinians the land that was once theirs back.
And so that sort of speaks to the chanting that happened earlier today, from the river to the sea, Palestine will be free. Do you think people should get freaked out by that phrase, or why do you feel okay with that phrase, from the river to the sea?
Yes. Well, there's a lot of propaganda that has been used against our chants, and just people saying free Palestine, anything against Israel, people will weaponize as anti-Semitism. And again, to reiterate, being anti-Israel, being anti the genocide of Palestinians is not being anti-Semitic at all, because the Zionist state weaponizes our religion as an excuse for what they are doing, but this is not about religion. This is not about Judaism. This is about a colonial state against a historically marginalized state of Palestine that has no military. They don't have any drones. They don't have any airplanes. They do not have the resources that Israel has. And from the river to the sea is you will hear a lot of Zionists talk about that it's a call to kill all Jewish people that are in Israel, and that is not what it is at all. It is not a call for violence. It is just a call to return the land to Palestinian people, simply as it is. None of our chants, none of our calls are inciting violence against anyone whatsoever. We support the Jewish community. A lot of the people here are Jewish people. And we are not trying to incite violence against any Israelis, against any Jewish people. That phrase, from the river to the sea, just simply means land back.
And so you have acknowledged that there is real anti-Semitism in this country and around the world. Have you found that people, either people from outside the university or even within the university, have used this encampment or these protests, because this is the first day of the encampment, to actually be anti-Semitic, or to say anti-Semitic things, or to be threatening to Jewish people in a real anti-Semitic way?
I haven't seen any of that here, but this is our first day. But I think the media does like to pick and choose these very rare instances. If you go to the encampments across the country, you're not going to see huge mass movements to kill all Jews or swastikas. That's just not the reality. It's that the media likes to pick and choose these very rare instances and portray them as something that is happening across all these movements, when that is really not true. If you're looking at who is being targeted for hate crimes, it is the pro-Palestinian people, it is the Muslim people, it is the black and brown people. You saw the Zionists at UCLA last night saying incredibly racist things, not just against Palestinians, but about black people, inciting violence against black people, against Muslims. So I personally, as a Jewish student, my religion has only ever been disrespected by Zionists, because they like to pick and choose which Jews to support and believe in as Jews, and they like to disqualify or undermine your Judaism if you are not pro-Israel, which is just completely invalid. And they like to weaponize the Zionists, and the media like to weaponize these very rare, because anti-Semitism does exist. Completely. It is a real issue, but it is not something that we have been seeing at these encampments, not at UCSC. I know everyone that is involved with an SJP, a lot of them are Jewish students. Everyone there loves Jewish people. I have had no experience with any type of discrimination for being Jewish from anyone pro-Palestinian. The only people that have ever disrespected my religion are Zionists.
This is a special KSQD broadcast of the breaking news of a pro-Palestinian encampment at the UCSC campus at the Quarry Plaza, which began yesterday, May 1st, during a May Day march and rally that ended at the Quarry Plaza. We wanted to feature this whole interview because, although it is just one student organizer, our view at Moment of Truth has been that student organizers have had less time to share their thoughts and feelings in the mainstream media than they have been actually talked about and discussed in long-form articles in The Atlantic and so on and so forth, often accused of anti-Semitism and violence. So we thought it important to bring a student voice to the forefront. Some of the things that Sasha says, I wonder about how realistic would it be to somehow dismantle the state of Israel and have everyone live together without a huge amount of rancor and violence at this time. But in my view, as someone who actually was a student activist at my own campus at Northwestern University against CIA activities around the world, CIA imperialist activities. Student organizers and protests of all kinds are just one part of a whole lot of pressure that changes the way that the world operates, whether that's South African apartheid and divestment from such, whether that's the anti-nuclear movement, whether that's even the Get Out the Vote movement, or women's rights, or black rights, civil rights, voting rights, indigenous rights. Protests have been an integral part of the American landscape, and without them, we would not have the rights that we have today. So anyway, in the spirit of allowing protests to be a part of what shapes us, this is an interview with a student organizer at UCSC who is an appointed media liaison for the encampment.
And so just to update everyone, yesterday, it looked like it went into the nighttime at UCLA on April 30th. A group of pro-Zionist individuals, some of them were masked. It was hard to tell who they were by masks and outfits. It almost looked like hazmat suits, came in and actually started to physically fight and beat on the pro-Palestinian encampment folks, and also shot fireworks into the encampment. There are Jewish people I know, students up here, because there have been other demonstrations and protests by them, who would feel very strongly that this was threatening to them, was threatening to their Jewishness, or who are very attached to the state of Israel. Have you encountered people like that? And what do you think? How do you handle that if you have a chance to have a conversation?
Yeah, well, I think UCLA has an especially high rate of Zionists, especially because they are incredibly high funded. That group of Zionists that was there last night, they had tens and thousands of dollars of donations. And you can just see their attitude versus our attitude. We do not want to engage in any violent tactics. Any of that. We just want to disengage. We do not want to incite any type of violence. And you saw these Zionists coming, throwing fireworks into the camp, pepper spraying people directly in the eyes, saying incredibly racist, incredibly violent threats. Some of them hoping that the pro-Palestinians would be R-worded, raped. And just really disgusting things. And you will never see, at least here, at least from our community, you will never see that from SJP people. We do not want to be violent. We do not want to incite anything. We do not want to yell any threats at Zionists at all. We know that they have their opinions, and we know that we're not going to change their mind. And I think we are not expecting to see as aggressive of a Zionist group here. We do know that there is a small group of people that they did have a protest here maybe around a month ago. It was a pretty small group of them, and SJP had a counterattack where we had probably 5 times the amount of people.
Can I ask you what SJP stands for?
Yes, Student Justice for Palestine.
Okay.
And basically national SJP called for all SJPs at every university in the country to launch an encampment. Yes, so we are heeding their call. And our SJP community here at UCSC is incredibly loving. We are grounded in community and love. We do not want to get into any type of violent escalation with anybody. We are anticipating getting a group of Zionists. Our plan is just to not engage, listen to them. We don't want to disregard their identities and their existence. We want them to feel heard. We are not here to cause any violence, to say anything anti-Semitic to them in any regards. But we do expect that they could be here. We're just going to try to disengage, and we are hoping to not have as violent of a group as we see at other universities. But I think when engaging with Zionists, it's just important to remember what we are fighting for.
So, Sasha, I'm wondering about some of the sort of regular charges, about what about the hostages? Do you support Hamas? Hamas did all these terrible things. There were rapes. I mean, it seems like possibly there were rapes, and this attack was very brutal. Is there a group position on whether or not this group supports Hamas, or whether the SJP supports Hamas or doesn't take a position? But that's, of course, something that a lot of Jewish people get very concerned about.
Well, we don't have an explicit group position on Hamas. We are here just to stand in solidarity and with the people of Gaza and stand against the genocide. What I will say about Hamas is that Hamas is an appendage of Israel. It exists because it was created by Israel. Netanyahu knew for over a year that these attacks were coming, and he didn't do anything to stop it because he wanted to use those attacks as an excuse to commit genocide. And obviously what happened on October 7th was horrible. No one is debating that. But I will say people like to talk about October 7th. What about October 8th? What about October 9th? And the genocides that have happened every day since then, and people are only focusing on that one day. And I will say, horrible things happened that day, but a lot of it was propaganda and fake news. A lot of the killings were actually from the IDF that day. Not all of it was from Hamas. A lot about the beheading babies, rapes, a lot of that was proven to be propaganda. And those are all tactics that the IDF has been using against Palestinians for decades. So if you are going to condemn Hamas, you also have to condemn Israel, because they have been using the same and worse tactics, but systemically. They're able to systemically affect all Palestinian people. Hamas doesn't have that capabilities. Hamas doesn't have a military behind them. You know, Israel has the capability to shut down the water and the power and affect every single Palestinian at once. And Hamas doesn't have that capability. So if you're going to condemn Hamas, you also have to condemn Israel and everything that they have been doing to Palestinians for 75 years before and every day since October 7th.
So do you support release of the hostages?
Yes, I support release of all hostages. There are obviously hostages that Hamas has, but the IDF has nearly 10,000 Palestinian hostages detained. Hamas has offered to let go the Israeli hostages in exchange for a ceasefire, but Netanyahu refuses to do that. Netanyahu does not want to end this war. He doesn't want to end this genocide. He doesn't care about the Israelis that are hostages. He doesn't care about his people. He cares about the ethnic cleansing of Palestine and getting the Palestinian land for himself.
I'm talking to Sasha, who is a junior at UCSC, who is part of the new encampment that actually has been in the works for some time at UCSC, that is here to, I'm going to let you say, why is the encampment here? What is the mission?
Yes. Our main goal is to raise awareness for and stand in solidarity with Gaza. All of the universities in Gaza have been destroyed, and we should be using our privileges as college students to stand in solidarity with everyone in Gaza and the students who no longer have an education. We are so privileged and so lucky to still have an intact university and to still be able to use our voices to educate on and raise awareness for Gaza and stand in solidarity with all of the countless martyrs. And our immediate demands that we want our university to meet is to divest. We demand a complete divestment from weapons manufacturing companies and research collaborations with weapons manufacturing industries. We demand that the university disclose and provide full transparency to all UC-wide and UCSC Foundation assets, including investments, donations, and grants. We demand a complete academic boycott and to cut ties with all Zionist institutions, including study abroad programs, fellowships, seminars, research collaborations, and universities. We expect the university to comply with BDS, National Committee within all operations, and we demand that the university end academic repression against pro-Palestinian faculty and students, and to protect free speech and roll back all academic discipline and charges against protesters. We demand cops off campus and to stop the mass surveillance and violence against students. And we want the university to end their silence and acknowledge the ongoing genocide in Palestine and call for a ceasefire.
Thank you, Sasha. How long are you all prepared to be here?
We have programs prepared for about a week. It could change.
And what do you mean by programs?
Well, we're setting up a popular university for Gaza. So we are doing community engagement activities. We are doing lectures. We're going to have professors do lectures. We're going to set up a library where people will come to get books. We are really just here to educate and have community engagement. And we have structures planned for about a week. And that could be extended. It's all subject to change, but right now we have plans through next Wednesday.
Thank you, Sasha. Sasha is with the encampment at UCSC that is pro-Palestinian. and anti-genocide in Gaza. Thank you so much, Sasha.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
There has been an update to this story as of May 2nd at 1:34 p.m. Upset Israelis and Jewish people have been circulating a photo online of a sign that was affixed to one of the fences at the UCSC encampment that read, "Death to all Jews," and seemed to indicate support for Hamas. I reached out to Sasha, the organizer I spoke with on May the 1st, and she said that this sign went up in the evening when their security team and a group of organizers were having a security meeting a little bit further away from the encampment. When they came back, they saw the sign and they covered it up immediately. She says, "We do not use this type of language, nor do we support it." She says she believes that outside people came to the university to put up the sign and then took pictures and immediately posted the sign on social media. She says she thinks this because the pictures of the sign went up so quickly on Reddit to begin with. Okay, so let's talk about some of the misunderstandings and attacks that even I have come under fire about or for when I said that DSA had not organized the ceasefire attendance and huge amounts of people who came to speak at City Council. I was attacked as anti-Semitic for trying to correct the record and talk about what was really going on. Again, I've been called anti-Semitic for reporting about the sign that had pro-Hamas statements and death to Israel on it when I tried to correct the record and say that that did not come from the students. So I'm just wondering what kind of operation is this, whether it's very localized or whether it's a larger national operation in which we are not allowed to report accurately and we are questioned when we do report accurately on what's happening. And then we are called anti-Semitic for reporting accurately on what's happening. At any rate, let's continue with some of the statements from Sasha and some of the questions that I had for student organizers at UCSC based on some of these statements. Sasha talked about Israel as a settler colonial apartheid state. And I have made a point of reaching out to Zionists that I know, Orthodox Jewish people that I know, and just Israelis that I know to have dialogues about these terms and these words and why they might object. And I will say that I didn't hear a lot about the Holocaust. I didn't hear a lot about why Jewish people went to Israel as part of the Zionist enterprise. And even before the Holocaust, there was tremendous amounts of anti-Semitism and violence against Jews around the world, in Spain and Portugal, in Russia and elsewhere. And so that's not as much a part of the dialogue as I would like, because I think that's also quite factual and needs to be a part of any discussion now about, what happens with this war/genocide and what happens going forward into the future. That is not to say that the Holocaust is not acknowledged. I just want to reiterate that there are a lot of Jewish students and Jewish adults in our community who are pro-ceasefire, who want an end to this war, and who blame Israel for a lot of what is happening, especially the tremendous death toll in Gaza at this time. At some campuses, students actually hold workshops and seminars about anti-Semitism, the history of anti-Semitism, and what it is. When I brought up the Holocaust within one of these programs at UCSC held by student activists, that was acknowledged. And I made the point that it's not quite the same kind of settler colonialism where people who have not been prosecuted, although I guess you could say in the United States, some of these people were religiously prosecuted who came over as quote unquote pilgrims, but not like with the Holocaust. So I think that's something to consider. And it speaks to a lot of, I think, the deep-seated fears and post-trauma that Jewish people have around any kind of attack or even criticism of Israel when they have seen Israel as their place of safety. They're like their one place of safety and belonging on earth. That does not negate the violence, the Nakba, the land grabs. I'm just saying, this is sort of what we're dealing with psychologically. Some of the other things Sasha said was that she wanted to give land back to the Palestinian people, all of the land from the river to the sea. The protesters do not talk about the destruction of the state of Israel in some kind of a violent way. They want to see, from what I understand, kind of like a new Palestinian state in which Israelis would also live. I find that incredibly unrealistic at this time. I cannot see Israelis and Palestinians living together in one country, given all the violence that has happened and all the anger and the pain and the grief that has been relentless since October 7th up until today. As for from the river to the sea, I have really close Jewish friends of mine who had a real reaction to that phrase at the beginning of pro-Palestinian protests. And I was able to even observe when one of my friends was on the same street as a pro-Palestinian protest, and they were chanting from the river to the sea, and he was trying to keep it together. So I understand that that feels like a threat of violence. Again, I feel like you have to always understand that there are two sides to this story. The Likud party platform, as I understand it, also contains such language from the river to the sea for Israelis, for Jews. And so then you have to think about, well, how do Palestinians think about that phrase when it comes from the Israeli side? And the truth is that the Israeli side, in terms of the land that is controlled by Israel, has only grown since 1948 and grown and grown and grown. So the reality on the ground isn't that Palestinians are getting more country or land from the river to the sea, but actually the opposite. The Israelis are getting more land from the river to the sea. Sasha said the Zionist state weaponizes our religion. I'm not going to touch that. I can understand that that would be incredibly offensive to hear for a lot of Jews and Israelis. I'm just going to leave it as, what's your interpretation of that statement? I'm pretty sure that hers is that using anti-Semitism to justify Israeli war and violence and bombings and so forth is a weaponization of Judaism. That, I believe, would be her stance. Sasha also talks about Black and brown people and attacks on Black and brown people as being a part of the Zionist counterattacks in UCLA. I think we've seen that. We've seen some affiliation with Proud Boys and white supremacists. I find that, as someone who actually I have been fighting anti-Semitism for some time and trying to point it out in QAnon, Proud Boys, and other sort of pro-MAGA groups, I find it super troubling. And it, to me, to start to ally with people who would also ally with like Nazis and white supremacists is hugely problematic and really negates the idea of never again from the overall Jewish community. Now, when Sasha talks about Black and brown people being attacked by Zionists, I've heard from Israelis, and I know this having traveled to Israel quite a bit, that there are Ethiopian Black Israelis, there are Sephardic Israelis, there are Mizrahim Israelis. There are all colors of Israelis. I think what many Israelis don't understand, or people who say this, is that the United States also has many different kinds of people. That doesn't mean we can't be racist and imperialist in our foreign adventures and misadventures, and it also doesn't mean that we aren't racist within our own country. So that's why that argument doesn't really hold up a lot of the time. People feel like Palestinians are being racially attacked and pathologized and made into terrorists all the time, or animals, as one Israeli official said, without distinguishing between Hamas and Palestinian civilians. Some other thoughts that might be shocking to some people. Sasha talked about Hamas being an appendage of Israel because of the funding. Well, she said because Netanyahu knew that the attack was coming. I understand that he did get intelligence, or intelligence at least was trying to get his way about an attack coming. I heard that this came from female intelligence officers, and also that there was funding from the Israeli government to Hamas through Qatar, and that this has been justified by, let's say, pro-war people or Zionist people as, sort of this innocent, while they were trying to help, Hamas run Gaza and run the infrastructure and services of Gaza. But actually, even former Israeli prime ministers have said there was a strategy to divide the PLO from Hamas, to isolate Hamas from the PLO, and to create friction between the two groups, and to ensure all of this, to ensure that there never be any kind of unity and any kind of two-state solution. As for release of hostages, Sasha said that she does support the release of hostages, but she also talked about Palestinian hostages. And it's true that if you count Palestinian security prisoners in Israeli prisons in 2022, there were 4,450 such prisoners, including 160 children, 32 women, and over 1,000, quote, administrative detainees. And these are people who are incarcerated without charges. So according to Amnesty International, since the 7th of October, Israeli forces have detained more than 2,200 Palestinian men and women, according to the Palestinian Prisoners Club. According to Israeli human rights organization HaMoked, between October 1st and the 1st of November, the total number of Palestinians held in administrative detention, which is when they are not charged and are not offered a trial, rose from 1,319 to 2,070 individuals. Amnesty International states, quote, the summary killings and hostage-taking by Hamas and other armed groups on the 7th of October are war crimes and must be condemned as such. But Israeli authorities must not use these attacks to justify their own unlawful attacks and collective punishment of civilians in the besieged Gaza Strip, and the use of torture, arbitrary detention, and other violations of the rights of Palestinian prisoners. The prohibition against torture can never be suspended or derogated from, including and especially at times like this. And then the Amnesty International website goes on to document several instances of torture that have been happening since October 7th from the Israeli side. Now, there's this part about propaganda and fake news that Sasha talks about, having to do with the rapes and the beheading of babies. I've been looking into this quite a bit, and there is an excellent report by American Prospect on what really happened on October the 7th. So first of all, let's just, as a baseline, establish that these attacks were horrific, as I said at the beginning of this podcast, and that initial reports from the military and Israeli spokespeople about the beheading of babies, the cutting of a fetus out of someone's stomach, these were actually not verified, and as far as anyone can tell, these are not true. But I think that this kind of atrocity propaganda has done its work. The Israeli population is enraged and outraged. I think the soldiers probably in Gaza are enraged and outraged because of this. And this will only generate more fear, anger, and violence. In terms of the rape, the systemic rape charges that came out in the New York Times in December, and also Sheryl Sandberg's new documentary, Screams Before Silence, I've been looking into this too. And the documentary and the New York Times article are problematic in many ways, including integrity of the witnesses and totally contradictory statements from UN forensics experts and other sexual violence experts, females, who looked at the same photos and evidence as Sheryl Sandberg and these other witnesses in the documentary, and say that there's no proof that these things happened and that these photos and videos do not show this. Personally, I don't doubt that rapes have happened, and I think they do happen in wartime, and wartime is horrific and awful and terrifying and disgusting, and so bad things happen, especially, from, I guess, a toxic masculine perspective. But I don't think the idea that there was systematic use of violent rape on the part of Hamas is being challenged by at least 60 journalism professors who have called on the New York Times to do an investigation of their article from December. And then also there's some very credible reports taking Sheryl Sandberg's documentary to task, especially on the show rising from the publication, the Washington, D.C. based publication, The Hill. I advise everyone to look into these criticisms of the documentary and the New York Times article. And now here is an update on the encampment at UCSC on May the 19th. The encampment has since hosted a surprise visit by the Black liberation feminist Angela Davis, who sat down on an extemporaneous basis to talk about the history of the Palestinian movement and solidarity with Black Lives Matter going back to protests in Ferguson. Also, the camp hosted Hatem Bazian that same day, the co-founder of Students for Justice in Palestine, which is the organization that is the umbrella for all of the student encampments across the United States. Also, Macklemore, the rapper, put out a new rap called Hens Hall, which has been sweeping the nation and especially amongst protesting groups and encampments. This rap song is about the 6-year-old Hind Rajab, who was killed about a month ago in Gaza by Israeli bombardment, and then also an ambulance that came to get her was also attacked, with many people killed inside of the ambulance. In other news, United Auto Workers 4811, which is actually the union for the University of California System's graduate student TAs, course assistants, research assistants, etc., decided in a supermajority vote of its membership to go on strike to support students and staff in response to the handling of protesters by the University of California System, especially at UC Irvine and UCLA, where the administration and police did nothing for 3 hours as protesters were being attacked by counter-protesters who were pro-Israel. My understanding is that UCSC is the first campus, the first branch of the UAW 4811 that is going to walk out on this strike tomorrow, as I'm recording this, May the 20th, but this is a UC system-wide wildcat strike, and so it will affect the entire UC system because grad students, TAs, research assistants are going to be stopping work, and there are still several more weeks left of school through the UC system, and we'll see what happens at commencements regarding Israel, Gaza, and Palestine. Next up, we are going to the Stanford campus with our roving reporter, Vara Ramakrishnan, to report on the encampment that actually started early on there in Stanford, California.
Yeah. The people, they won't leave. What is threatening about divesting and want a piece? The problem isn't the protests, it's what they're protesting. It goes against what our country is funding. Block the barricade until Palestine is free. Block the barricade until Palestine is free. When I was 7, I learned a lesson from Cuban Eazy-E. What was it again? Oh yeah, the police. Actors and badges protect.
So now we're going to go to Vara Ramakrishnan's reporting from the Stanford University encampment. This is one of the very first encampments that happened on any college campus. She was there on Friday, May the 3rd, describing the scene, and from what I could see at UCSC and their encampment and other encampments that have been featured in the news media, this is fairly typical of what we're seeing. The next two audio clips are of a Stanford medical student who Vara interviewed, who was in scrubs when she was interviewed at the Stanford encampment and protest for Palestine. And then a young man who spoke up during a vigil for the lives lost in Gaza at the Stanford encampment. So you will hear those two audio clips one after the other now.
So I'm here with a Stanford student at the encampment. She's going to tell us a little bit about what's going on here and the previous versions of the encampment.
Well, we gathered today, and we've been gathering here for a very long time. This encampment and the sit-in that went on for 120 days before at Stanford, has more or less been the only safe space for Palestinians and non-Palestinian students alike at Stanford. I remember when the sit-in first started before it was an encampment. I remember that I know I speak for a lot of the students, when we would elect to sleep at the sit-in, it would feel safer than our own homes, because it was a time where we felt, one, extreme hurt, and also just extreme political isolation, being on the campus that we are, and feeling that we were sort of screaming into the void, and perhaps that administration were drawing lines, that they always drew lines on killing children, and they always drew lines on, fighting for the sanctity of human life, especially at the medical school, and how far we're supposed to go to preserve such human life. And then that line was so neatly drawn to leave out the Palestinians.
No abstract or theory injustice. Israel's fascism and sadism and the different ways of killing and torturing that they have been subjecting Palestinians to for years has to end, and it has surpassed every possible nightmare. Each one of these names, each one of these numbers has a similar story. How are you going to convince a child's parents that Israel killed that they should accept a peace plan? How are you going to convince a child that is growing up orphaned that he should accept some solution of yours? Each one and every individual one of those has loved ones, and each one and every one of those has a life, and justice has to be served with them. This is the only way we can mourn them rightfully. Thank you.
I understand that for a lot of Jewish people and Zionists to hear that Israel is fascist, that Israel is committing genocide from the mouths of these students and from other people. The International Court of Justice also warned and cautioned that genocide was a real possibility. I think that the central question here boils down to what is actually happening on the ground in Gaza, because a lot of Jewish people will say, no, we are not ethnically cleansing Gaza. We are not committing a genocide. How could that even be possible? But there have been statements from high-ranking Israeli ministers in the government and people who are very adjacent to the government that indicate that there is a plan for ethnic cleansing. And those statements have had to do with, and also from Jared Kushner, formerly, of Donald Trump's cabinet, that this is prime real estate property, that there was a conference in Israel where it was advertised that this was prime real estate property in Gaza for Israelis and Jews. There have been actual sales of pieces of land. I don't know how that's happening in states in the United States, conducted by Orthodox Jewish people who are intent on sort of moving into Gaza. And to be honest, reports from Israel sound like a lot of Israelis, because of the attack on them and their incredible fear and anger, actually don't care anymore if Palestinians stay in Gaza or not. I don't know. I don't have any statistics on that, but this is what I've heard about the public sentiment. So if there is an attempt to rid Gaza of Palestinians, and if that attempt includes the destruction of hospitals, universities, 12 of which have been completely either destroyed or partially destroyed, schools, cultural centers, libraries, the devastation and death toll in Gaza, which a lot of Israelis do not believe to be actually true, must be examined. That is probably my central concern, is that a group of people whose entire country is based on the idea of never again must not allow any kind of ethnic cleansing or genocide to happen in Gaza. If it is happening, it is the responsibility of Jewish people and human beings everywhere to make sure that they understand what is happening, to not just cast aside death toll figures, which actually have been, these were never in question in past bombings of Gaza, what the health ministry was saying. These were not in question until this particular quote unquote war. And the the Gazans have come out with lists of people's names and ID numbers of those who were killed early on. They probably can no longer keep track. We have Doctors Without Borders. We have Save the Children. We have UNICEF. We have, of course, UNRWA, which, the Israeli government has been trying to discredit, and many Israelis are skeptical of, and the United Nations saying that this is a catastrophe of the highest order, that famine and malnutrition are happening. Now, you can say that's all propaganda. You can say that's coming from the Chinese and the Russians and from TikTok. But we have State Department officials who have left the State Department in the United States due to this war, due to the humanitarian catastrophe that is unfolding in Gaza. So I just think it behooves every single Israeli and Jew to really look without blinders on at what is happening, so that the undermining of the Jewish cause and the Jewish cause of fighting anti-Semitism does not continue the way it is. That's my opinion, and I pray that the violence and the killing stops. This is Amy Chen Mills with Moment of Truth on KSQD on the California Central Coast. Thank you so much for listening. Please contact the Moment of Truth team at Amy, AMI, at ksqd.org with questions or comments about our program. Find our new podcast and review, subscribe, and comment at Apple, iTunes, and at YouTube. Amy's coaching and education website is at www.amychen.com. Moment of Truth gives many thanks to our team, Nyanko Nyasu, sound and tech engineer, and our research and production team, Nyanko, Mei-Ling Obinada, Todd Zimmerman, and Vara Ramakrishnan. Todd Zimmerman of Nativeverse Studios created the theme song. Kathy Krizik created our logo. Thanks to our KSQD program manager, Howard Feldstein, and the entire amazing KSQD team on the California Central Coast where this show originates. Thank you for tuning in to Moment of Truth, and remember, if we don't use our democracy, we lose our democracy.